Hi, Bethlehem. As you know, we are reopening Bethlehem's building this morning for in-person worship. And I'm sorry that you're not able to make it. I'm looking forward to being able to see you. But we want to make sure that everyone is comfortable and that they return when they are ready to. And for that reason, we want to provide our service online yet. So you can be part of our worship time here at Bethlehem. You can still have that connection. I was hoping that we would be able to live stream both here on YouTube and on Facebook. But because of some restrictions on YouTube, we're not able to live stream it. We will still live stream on Bethlehem's Facebook page. So if you want to see our worship live, you can go to Facebook. Right now, what I want to do is just quickly give you my sermon. So you can, if this is your time to participate in worship, that at least you are able to hear the message that I have today. So our sermon text this morning is going to be from Hebrews chapter 10, verses 23 through 25. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 23 through 25. Now, during the stay-at-home time, we had the ability or the time to do a lot of different things. And one of the things that I did is that I did some extra reading. And one of the books that I read during our time away was this book, Analog Church: Why We Need Real People, Real Places, and Things in the Digital Age. And it was a little strange, I have to say, to be reading a book about the importance of being in real community, connected with real people, and moving away from doing things online during that very moment when we were forced to do so much online and not have those in-person connections. There were two important lessons that I learned from the book, or two things that really stood out to me. First of all was the idea that what people are looking for is a sense of transcendence, or a sense that they belong to something that's bigger than themselves and not relevance. For the last few decades, the church has really pushed this thought that we need to be relevant. We need to have a relevant message to the community around us, to the culture that we're in. And the reality of all that is that we are now having this generation, younger millennials on down, who we can't be relevant. We can't do things in a relevant manner for them. And what their souls, what their hearts are crying out for is a sense of transcendence, some being part of something that's bigger than themselves. In fact, I think that's part of what the protests that we see around us right now are a part of. People want to matter. They want to have their voice heard. They want to be part of this bigger movement. The second lesson that I learned from the book is that people long and have a desire for a real sense of community, and not just online connections and online followers. They want to have people in their lives. They want to have real relationships. And as I thought about these two lessons, as I thought about these two realities, I thought about the fact that, hey, the church should be, God created the church to meet both of those needs, both of those desires, right? We need to remember that the purpose of the church is to make disciples. See, the church isn't about us. The church isn't just about a time of worship. It's not just about what happens on a Sunday morning. No, the purpose of the church is to make disciples. It's a calling outside of ourselves. It's a calling to join God in what He is doing in this world. So when we talk about making disciples, we're talking about going into our culture, into our communities, and calling people into a relationship with Jesus. And from there, we are intentionally engaged in maturing and growing people so that they become more and more like Jesus. That's the purpose of the church. And part of this making disciples is this call of justice, is this call of helping, and it's this call of serving. And we see this in the history of the church where Christians were involved in starting hospitals and starting soup kitchens and homeless shelters and involved in the anti-slavery movement. We see that's part of the history of the church, is this call of making things right when we can. So that's part of discipleship, part of being a disciple of Jesus. So that's the purpose of the church. And so often we've looked at the church as this place that we go to on a Sunday morning for worship. But the true calling of the church is this call to make disciples, a call to join something that's bigger than ourselves. And not only is the purpose of the church to make disciples, but here too we need to remember that discipleship happens within the context of community. Discipleship happens within the context of community. True discipleship can't happen on our own, by ourselves. We need a community of people speaking into our lives, a community of people helping us to serve, a community of people coming alongside of us and encouraging us, guiding us. We need one another. We need one another in our pursuit of being disciples of Jesus. Discipleship happens within the context of community. So how do we become a community that fosters discipleship? Well, the book of Hebrews is written to a community, to a Christian community made up of Jewish Christians living in Rome. And they are on the verge of giving up. They've gone through this one wave of persecution where their stuff was taken, their homes were taken away. And now they're facing a second wave of persecution where their very lives are at risk. And they're like, maybe we should just go give this all up and go back and just practicing Judaism. Because Judaism is a legal religion within the empire. We won't have to face this persecution. Let's just give up this Jesus stuff. And so it appears then some pastor, preacher that has a connection with these Jewish Christians in Rome hears about this. He's no longer a part of that community. He's no longer right there, but he gets word that this is what's happening. And he writes this letter, and this letter is more in the form of a sermon to encourage them. And then towards the end of the book, in chapter 10, he has some words of encouragement about being together. So Hebrews chapter 10, verses 23 through 25. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 23 through 25. Let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. So here what we find, and one of the things that the writer of Hebrews is emphasizing, is the importance of presence. That we need to be present within the community. That is crucial. That is what needs to happen. See, we need to be present, he says, in order to hold tightly to our hope. Verse 23, let us. So this is a community effort. This is a together effort. This is not an individual thing. It's a together thing, a community thing. Let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm. So let us hold this securely. Let us not let this go. Let's make sure that this is in place. Let's not waver from this. And hope comes when we're together. We're able to hold on to the hope because of togetherness, because of community, because of that common encouragement. Think about when Satan causes us to lose hope. Think about when we get depressed, and one of the answers to depression. See, we're depressed and we lose our hope when we feel isolated, when we feel all alone. And so we come together to hold on to that hope. We don't waver from it. And what hope do we have? We have this hope in Jesus of eternal life, of new creation, of God restoring things and making things right. The writer of Hebrews reminds us that we can hold on to this. We can encourage one another with this truth because God keeps his promises. We need to be present in order to hold on to the hope. We have to be present to motivate each other. Verse 24, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. When it comes to our spiritual formation, or when it comes to spiritual disciplines, right? Almost all of them we can do by ourselves. We can do our Bible reading. We can do some Bible study. We can do our prayers. We can do our singing. We can fast. We can give. We can do those types of things in isolation. The one thing that we can't do in isolation that is crucial to our spiritual formation, to our discipleship, is love. Love requires community. Love requires other people. And as we serve and as we love other people, what happens is we motivate them. Yeah, we can motivate in part by talking and encouraging. But real motivation happens when people see, and they see that this makes a difference. That provides that motivation. But that love, that service that we're called to do, those good works that we're called to do, that requires a community, that requires being there in person, that requires helping one another out. And so we need to be present in order to hold on to the hope. We need to be present in order to motivate each other. And we need to be present in order to encourage each other. We need to be present in order to encourage each other. Verse 25, and let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. So the writer here especially calls out those people who want to neglect their time of meeting together. See, apparently what is happening is, because these are Jewish Christians, they're part of a local synagogue as well as part of the local church. And they were giving up their meeting together as a community of Christians and just focusing on their meeting together as Jews. And the writer says, don't do that. Do not neglect this. This is important. Why? Because we need to encourage each other through the trials and tribulations of life. We need to encourage one another through this time of persecution, through this time of hardships. See, when we're going through hard times, when we going through difficulties, we need one another right there in person to encourage us, to give us hugs, to have a shoulder to cry on. Right? And the writer here says, this is so important as the day of his return draws near. And I know it's fashionable right here in this moment to talk about, are we in the end times? To look at Revelation, like where are we in this book? And let me say this, and let me be very clear about this. Yeah, we are in the end time. We've been in the end time ever since Jesus returned to heaven. And Jesus was very clear, and the writers of the New Testament are very clear that all of us, every generation of Christians, have these times of trials and tribulations and persecutions and hardships. It's always going to happen, and that's why we need to be there for one another to encourage each other through it. Otherwise, what are we going to do? We're going to give up. And so we need to be present. We need to commit to being present. So often, we have come to look at church in a very consumeristic way. And it's part of our culture. It's part of the reality that we have all these different churches within our community. That if we don't like one, we can go to the other. And what we lose in that is a sense of commitment, a commitment to this group of people. We are built up. We are spiritually formed through not necessarily the smooth times, the easy times, the good times. No, God so often uses the hard times, the difficult times, those times when there's relationship conflict, those times when we don't get our way, when things don't turn out the way that we should, that we think it should. God uses those to grow us. So here's the big idea this morning. The big idea is this: that in community, there is no substitute for presence. Within the community, there is no substitute for presence. If you want to feel connected to your church family, to your Christian community, you need to show up. You need to be present. There needs to be a connection there. And I know for us who are still staying at home, that I don't want you to hear this the wrong way, right? I want you to hear that you're still able to be intentionally connected and engaged within Bethlehem. But that takes work. That takes a commitment. You have to show up in some way if you're going to feel connected here. If you don't feel connected to your local church, if you don't feel connected to Bethlehem, it's because you're not here. You haven't showed up. You're not committed. And we need to be committed to one another. It's crucial. It's crucial through this time. It's crucial as we move forward. And so our challenge this week is this: to show up in the lives of the people that we love, to show up in the lives of the people that we love. I love you guys. And I'm glad that you're a part of Bethlehem. I'm glad that you feel connected here. I want to encourage you to find ways to encourage one another in person, online, virtually, through a note, through the mail, through a phone call. We need to encourage one another. Hey, thank you, Bethlehem, for watching. I look forward to seeing you again. But make sure that when you come back, that you're comfortable with being back. And in the meantime, we're going to do what we can to make sure that we all feel connected, that we all feel a part of Bethlehem. Can you help me do that? Thank you. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful week, and God bless.